This is a political witch hunt, the likes of which nobody's ever seen before. It's a pure witch hunt. It's a hoax.
Marcia Coyle is chief Washington correspondent for the National Law Journal.
Is there a message to a president who says he has his Article 2 powers allow him to do whatever he wants?
Today, the Supreme Court heard arguments in 3 landmark cases, all involving subpoenas for President Trump's personal financial records. They have big implications for presidential power and could ultimately determine whether Trump will have to release his tax returns before the November election. And in a big slide of the Times, the public got to hear the arguments live in real time. ABC's Devin Dwyer covers the Supreme Court and joins us now. Devin.
Okay, so let me ask you something. When was the last time you saw the Supreme Court move this fast? Like, seriously? Because right now they're racing through Trump cases like it's Black Friday and everything's 90% off and people are losing their minds over it. The Supreme Court just put 3 massive Trump cases on the express lane. We're talking tariffs, we're talking executive power, we're talking mail-in ballots, and they want all of this decided before the spring primaries. Can you believe this? The same court that takes forever to decide anything is suddenly in a rush when it comes to cases that could reshape how our entire government works. And here's where it gets wild. Over half of Americans, according to a September poll from Marquette Law School, think the Supreme Court is deliberately avoiding confrontation with Trump, like they're dodging him on purpose. That's not some fringe conspiracy theory. That's actual polling data from October 2nd. More than half the country thinks something sketchy is going on. So what's really happening here? Are we watching the Supreme Court do its job super efficiently? Or are we watching something else entirely? Let me paint you a picture. 3 cases, all connected to Trump, all fast-tracked. First one's about tariffs, set for November 2025. Second one's about whether Trump can control independent agencies. That's December. And the third, oh, this one's my favorite. It's about mail-in ballot legality. You know, the thing that could literally change how millions of people vote in 2024. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, okay, maybe they're just being efficient, let me throw some more context at you. Federal judges and legal experts, including this guy Irv Gorenstein from Georgetown Law, have been raising red flags about how the court's been operating. They're pointing out this pattern of emergency orders. And get this, over 20 interim rulings this year have gone in Trump's favor. 20. That's not a coincidence, that's a pattern. And social media? Oh man, Twitter's exploding. Hashtags like SCOTUS, rigged, and Trump cases are trending everywhere. People are furious. They're questioning whether the whole system is legitimate anymore. And honestly, can you blame them? Here's what nobody's talking about though. This isn't just about Trump winning or losing some court cases. This is about the fundamental structure of American democracy. Because if the Supreme Court can just decide to speed up cases that benefit one guy, what does that say about equal justice? What does that say about checks and balances? Think about it like this. You're waiting in line at the DMV. You've been there for 3 hours. And then some guy walks in, skips the whole line, and gets served immediately. You'd be mad, right? You want to know why that person gets special treatment. That's what's happening here, except instead of a DMV, it's the highest court in the land. And instead of renewing a license, we're talking about cases that could redefine presidential power for generations. The New York Times reported on October 6th that these cases are all scheduled for arguments and rulings before the spring primaries. BBC confirmed the same thing. This is real. This is happening. And the timing, come on, the timing is everything. Because here's the thing. If the court rules that Trump can slap tariffs on whoever he wants, that changes trade policy forever. If they rule he can control independent agencies, that's a massive power grab for the executive branch. And if they mess with mail-in ballot rules right before an election, that's potentially millions of voters affected. So yeah, people are freaking out, and maybe they should be. Because when the Supreme Court starts moving at lightning speed on cases that just happen to involve the most controversial political figure in modern American history, that raises questions. Big questions. Questions about fairness, about impartiality, about whether our institutions are actually working the way they're supposed to. And we're going to break all of this down. We're going to look at what these cases actually mean, why the fast tracking matters, and what it could mean for every single American watching this right now. Because trust me, this affects you whether you realize it or not. All right, let's dig into this. Because the surface level stuff, that's just the beginning.
The U.S. Supreme Court ruled on subpoenas for President Trump's financial records and underscores that no one is above the law. And the nation struggles to stop COVID-19 as surging infections show no one is beyond its reach.
What's really going on here is way more complicated and way more concerning than most people realize. So first, we need to understand what fast tracking actually means. The Supreme Court doesn't normally rush, like at all. They take their sweet time. Cases can sit on their docket for months, sometimes over a year, before they even hear arguments. That's normal. That's how it's supposed to work, because these are complicated legal questions that deserve careful consideration. But now, Now they're suddenly sprinting through 3 Trump cases like there's a fire sale. And the question everyone should be asking is, why? What changed? Let's look at the 3 cases individually because each one is absolutely wild on its own. Case number 1, tariffs. This is about whether Trump can unilaterally impose sweeping tariffs on other countries without congressional approval. Now this might sound boring, but stay with me because it's huge. If the court rules in Trump's favor, it means the president can basically reshape international trade policy without any checks from Congress. That's an insane amount of power. We're talking about potentially billions of dollars in economic impact, relationships with allies and trade partners, all of it controlled by one person. And they want this decided by November? Come on, that's less than 2 months away. For context, the average Supreme Court case takes like 6 months from argument to decision. But this one? Nah, we're doing it in weeks apparently. Case number 2, control over independent agencies. This one's even crazier. There are certain government agencies that are supposed to be independent, like the Federal Reserve, the FTC, the SEC. They're designed to operate without direct presidential control because we don't want one person having their fingers in every pie. That's literally why they were created that way. But Trump's been trying to change that. He wants more direct control over these agencies. And if the Supreme Court says, yeah, sure, go ahead, that fundamentally alters the balance of power in our government. It concentrates authority in the executive branch in a way we haven't seen before. And they scheduled this for December right in the middle of primary season. Convenient, right? And then, oh man, case number 3, mail-in ballots. The legitimacy of mail-in voting. This is the nuclear option of election cases. Because depending on how the court rules, they could literally change who's allowed to vote and how they're allowed to do it in an election year while primaries are happening. You see the problem here? This isn't just about legal precedent or constitutional interpretation. The timing of these decisions could directly impact the election itself. If they restrict mail-in voting right before primaries, that affects turnout. That affects who can participate. That affects the outcome. Now, let's talk about this Marquette Law School poll from September. Over 50% of Americans think the Supreme Court is avoiding confrontation with Trump. Think about what that means. More than half the country doesn't trust the Supreme Court to be impartial when it comes to cases involving Trump. That's a legitimacy crisis. And it's not just random people on the street saying this. Federal judges are concerned. Legal experts from places like Georgetown are raising alarms. These are people who've spent their entire career studying the court, and they're saying something's off. Irv Gorenstein from Georgetown Law pointed out that there's been this pattern of emergency orders this year. And yeah, over 20 of them have gone in Trump's favor. Now the court's defenders will say, well, maybe those were just the right legal decisions. Okay, maybe. But 20 in 1 year, when emergency orders are supposed to be rare, that's a lot. Here's what makes this even more suspicious. The court has been using what's called the shadow docket more and more. That's basically when they make decisions without full arguments, without detailed explanations, just quick rulings on emergency requests. And a lot of those shadow docket decisions have favored Trump on things like immigration, transgender rights, executive orders. So there's this established pattern. And now we're seeing it again with these fast-track cases. The court saying, don't worry, we're just being efficient. But come on, you can't blame people for being skeptical. Let's talk about what this means for the election.
To their decision in these cases. It was a big one today at the Supreme Court. House Democrats want the president's financial records for their investigations into his businesses and possibly to write some new ethics laws. The Manhattan District Attorney has subpoenaed the president as part of a grand jury probe into possible financial crimes. Those subpoenas are all on the table, and the president has lost in every lower federal court so far.
Because that's really what this is about, right? These decisions could redefine campaign finance rules. They could change voting procedures. They could expand presidential powers in ways that directly benefit Trump during the primaries and general election. If Trump gets more control over independent agencies, he can potentially influence economic policy, regulatory decisions, all sorts of stuff that affects how people vote. If the tariff case goes his way, he can point to that as a win and campaign on it. And if mail-in voting gets restricted, that's huge for turnout, especially in certain demographics. This is why people are freaking out on social media. Hashtags like SCOTUS rigged and Trump cases aren't just trending because people are bored. They're trending because folks are genuinely worried that the system is broken. That the Supreme Court, which is supposed to be above politics, is actually playing politics. And you know what? Maybe they're right to worry. Because even if the court's intentions are pure, even if every single decision they make is based on sound legal reasoning, the appearance of impropriety matters. The perception of bias matters. When more than half the country thinks you're in the tank for one guy, that's a problem for democracy. Here's another thing that's not getting enough attention. This connects to past controversies. Remember when the court made those immigration decisions that everyone said were too favorable to Trump, or the transgender rights cases, or the various executive order disputes? Each time critics said the court was bending over backwards to accommodate Trump's agenda, and each time defenders said it was just normal legal process. But when you add it all up, when you look at the pattern over years, it starts to look less like isolated incidents and more like a trend. And now, with these three major cases all fast-tracked at once, that trend is impossible to ignore. So where does this leave us? We've got three massive cases that could reshape American government, all scheduled for quick resolution in the middle of an election cycle, with more than half the country already suspicious about the court's impartiality. And we're all just supposed to trust that everything's fine. Yeah, right. Okay, so let's break this down into simple terms. Because all of this legal jargon and political theater can get confusing, here's what's actually happening and why you should care. Point number one, the Supreme Court is rushing through cases that could massively expand presidential power. And they're doing it right when it matters most politically. That's not normal. That's not how the court usually operates. And the fact that it's happening now with these specific cases raises serious questions about motivation. Like, let's be real for a second. If you were trying to help someone gain more power, wouldn't you fast track the cases that give them more authority? Wouldn't you schedule them for times when those decisions would have maximum political impact? I'm not saying that's definitely what's happening, but come on, it doesn't look great. Point number two, public trust in the Supreme Court is collapsing. That Marquette poll showing over 50% of Americans think the court's avoiding confrontation with Trump, that's devastating for institutional legitimacy. The Supreme Court only works if people believe it's fair, if people believe it's impartial. Once that trust is gone, the whole system starts to crack. And we're seeing that crack widen right now. Social media is exploding with people questioning whether the court is rigged. Legal experts are raising alarms. Even federal judges are expressing concern. This isn't just partisan whining. This is a genuine crisis of confidence in one of our most important institutions. Point number three, the timing of these decisions matters more than the decisions themselves. Even if the court rules completely fairly on all three cases, even if every decision is legally sound and constitutionally justified, the fact that they're being decided right before primaries creates the appearance of political interference. Perception matters, especially in democracy. If people think the game is rigged, they stop playing, they stop participating, they stop believing the system can work for them. And that's dangerous. That's how democracies start to fail. Now let's talk about what comes next.
Absolute immunity from any investigation into his private business affairs as long as he's in office. Let's take a listen.
What's really happening here could not be clearer. The presidency is being harassed and undermined with improper process.
Because these three cases are just the beginning. Depending on how they're decided, we could see a fundamental restructuring of how the federal government operates. If the tariff case goes Trump's way, future presidents will have way more unilateral power over trade policy. Congress will be sidelined. That changes the balance of power between branches of government in a major way. If the independent agency case goes Trump's way, the executive branch gets significantly stronger. Those agencies that were designed to be independent, not anymore. The president gets direct control. That's huge. That's a level of executive power we haven't seen in modern American history. And if the mail-in ballot case restricts voting access, that affects millions of people. That changes who can participate in democracy. That's not just about one election. That sets precedent for future elections too. So yeah, the stakes here are massive. This isn't just political drama for people to argue about on Twitter. This is fundamental stuff about how our government works and who has power, who benefits from all this. Well, obviously Trump benefits if these cases go his way. He gets more power, fewer restrictions, and potentially favorable election rules. But it's bigger than just him. This is about presidential power, generally. Future presidents, whether you like them or not, will inherit whatever precedents get set here, and that's what makes this so important. We're not just talking about Trump versus his opponents. We're talking about the structure of American democracy for decades to come. We're talking about whether the Supreme Court is a neutral arbiter or a political player. We're talking about whether our institutions can maintain legitimacy in an era of extreme polarization. Here's what most people don't understand though. The fast track in itself might be the biggest problem. Not the decisions, not even the outcomes, but the process. Because when you rush major constitutional questions, you don't get the careful deliberation that's supposed to happen. You don't get the thorough analysis. You get quick decisions that might not fully consider all the implications. And in law, especially constitutional law, implications matter. Precedents matter. What you decide today affects cases for generations. So when you sprint through that process because of political timing, yeah, people are going to question your motives. Let's talk about what you can do about this. Because it's easy to feel helpless when you're watching the Supreme Court make decisions that could affect your life. But you're not helpless. Public pressure matters. Media attention matters. When people make noise about judicial overreach or questionable processes, institutions notice.
And how did the justices respond to that?
Yeah, absolute immunity from any investigation. An extraordinary claim by Jay Sekulow, the president's private attorney. It landed flat with the justices, Lindsay. They did not take to the argument. In fact, they didn't address it very much. The Supreme Court, as you remember, in 1974 said Richard Nixon had to comply with that subpoena from the Watergate special prosecutor in 97.
The fact that hashtags like SCOTUS rigged are trending, that matters. That puts pressure on the court to at least explain their reasoning, to justify why these cases need to be fast-tracked, to show their work and prove they're being impartial. Stay informed, follow these cases as they develop. Understand what's being argued and what the potential outcomes are. Don't just rely on headlines or sound bites. Actually dig into the legal issues because they're important and they affect you. And look, I know this is heavy stuff. I know it's frustrating to feel like the system might be broken, but the alternative to paying attention is letting decisions get made without any public scrutiny, and that's worse. So here's the bottom line. The Supreme Court just put 3 massive Trump-related cases on a fast track. They're scheduled to be decided right before crucial primaries. More than half of Americans already think the court's in the tank for Trump. Legal experts are concerned. The pattern of favorable rulings continues. And all of this is happening during an election year when these decisions could have maximum political impact. Coincidence? Maybe, but probably not. This is about power. This is about who controls the levers of government and how much they can get away with. This is about whether our institutions can remain impartial in the face of political pressure. And right now, the answer to that question is looking pretty shaky. So keep watching, keep questioning, keep demanding accountability, because if we don't, if we just let this slide, then we're basically saying it's okay for the highest court in the land to play favorites. And once we cross that line, there's no going back. Next time, we're going to look at what happens if all 3 of these cases go Trump's way, what that means for executive power, what that means for elections, what that means for you. Because trust me, you're going to want to understand this before it's too late. Stay skeptical, stay informed, and don't let anyone tell you that questioning the Supreme Court is unpatriotic. Holding institutions accountable, that's the most patriotic thing you can do.